Opening night of the NBA season is fast approaching, so I'm busting out my crystal ball to try to predict how things are going to shake out at the end of the season. So this is kind of like a prediction of where teams are going to land in the final power rankings, but I didn't want to cop out and use like the traditional tier system and put like 7 teams in the same tier. But getting every single outcome right is also like impossible. So I've got 10 groups of 3 for you. Here we go. Group number 1. If any of these 3 teams wins the title this year, nobody is surprised, but it would still be kind of surprising. Here's what I mean. It starts with the Boston Celtics, who just won the title last year, so obviously this group is capable. However, repeating is hard, and it would be pretty surprising if this group did it, particularly with Porzingis missing significant time. Next, the Oklahoma City Thunder. This group is really young, and it would be a bit surprising if they didn't have at least 1 or 2 more failures on their way before they were able to get over the hump. And the final team in Group 1 is the Minnesota Timberwolves. Similar to the Thunder, except it's their star, Anthony Edwards, who is still really young. So it would be a surprise if he was able to lead them to a title this early in his career. Group number 2, these teams have title hopes, but it's not a failure if they don't win. Like the Denver Nuggets. There's championship DNA on this roster, but they are relying a ton on young guys who are very unproven. And if they had an injury to a key player, it would really, really hurt them. Not to mention the Russell Westbrook of it all, but Jokic is still enough to cover up a lot of flaws. And how about the New York Knicks? They've put together a very impressive roster on paper, but it's not the most durable group, and it doesn't have a ton of depth. If it goes right, it could go really right, but it wouldn't be a shock if they were just a top 5 team and not the last one standing. The final team of Group 2 is the Dallas Mavericks. Logic suggests the team who loses in the finals should be a contender next year, and that wouldn't be shocking, but call me a skeptic. I have trepidations with this group. I think both Kyrie and Klay have a lot of questions, and I personally wouldn't be shocked if it wasn't an amazing year and they were more like a second-round playoff team than a title team. Which leads us into Group 3. These teams could make a playoff run, but they probably won't. Kicking off this group is the Philadelphia 76ers. The Sixers won the free agent market. Their grand prize? Paul George, who has already had his first knee injury, and the expectation is that Embiid won't play back-to-backs for like the rest of his life, apparently. I'm not betting on this group being healthy enough to achieve their goals of making that lasting playoff run. Maybe a surprise team in this group, the New Orleans Pelicans. I really like the DeJounte Murray addition, and I think it could be enough to give this group a lift from a play-in team to a real playoff team. But until Zion proves he's as durable as he needs to be as their star, they're still likely going to finish below the top level teams. Rounding out Group 3, I've got the Milwaukee Bucks. I'm not very high on the Bucks, but Giannis is still an absolute force. It's everything around him that I worry about. I like Damian Lillard, but I don't have confidence that he's going to be better for them than he was last year, and that could mean a top 3 or 4 seed in the East again, but I don't think it will mean real legitimate title contention. Group 4, solid playoff teams. Kicking this one off, I've got the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Cavs are a good team, and they're going to stay a good team throughout this season, but I'm not sure that swapping out the coaching staff is enough to catapult them above some of the other top teams in the league. The Sacramento Kings. I'm excited for the Kings to score a ton of points and win a lot of games. It will be interesting to see if there's another move coming too. I've seen some of those rumors about Brandon Ingram or Zach LaVine going there. With or without that though, I still think they're probably hovering in this same range. And to wrap up Group 4, I've got the Orlando Magic. I am high on the Magic this year. I think we're in for a Franz Wagner breakout season. I really like the KCP addition to this group, and I think this is the year that they solidify themselves as a consistent playoff team that's going to be a tough out and not just an intriguing young team. Group 5. Can we just stay out of the play-in? This is where I've got the Phoenix Suns. Tyus Jones is a great addition for this team. I think they needed a real point guard, but I don't think he's the missing piece to vault them into contention. They're just still relying on guys who miss time, and they don't have much to work with down low, and they have virtually no depth on the roster whatsoever. Devin Booker is great, Kevin Durant is great, and then a lot of questions. This is also where I have the Los Angeles Lakers. As much as I want to see LeBron competing for titles as long as he's still this good, this is just a realistic range of who this team is. They're essentially the same group as last year. They're probably not going to get the same combination of health and dominance from both LeBron and AD as they had last year. And I just don't think that JJ Redick is adding some new dimension that makes them more than a team competing to try to stay out of the play-in. Finally, the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers going from conference finals to basically the same regular season success feels disrespectful. And maybe it is, but I think that was more matchup and circumstance than a real barometer of who they are. Who they are is probably right here. That leads us to Group 6, where the play-in is the most likely outcome. Here I've got the Memphis Grizzlies. If I'm being disrespectful to the Pacers, I'm definitely being disrespectful to the Grizzlies. But admittedly, I'm gonna have to see it. Ja and Jaren Jackson Jr. are already hurt. They're relying on a plodding rookie at center that I'm personally not sold on. The ceiling is high, but I think the floor is also really low, and I think reality falls right in the middle, right around the play-in. I've also got the Houston Rockets in this group. The young Rockets are on the upswing, and I think they've jumped some teams in the pecking order by the end of the year. I think a realistic goal outcome for them is being in the play-in mix. Last for Group 6, the Golden State Warriors. Steph might still have some juice in the tank, but I think by the end of the year, we're seeing that tank running pretty low with how much he has to carry this group. Competing for the play-in just feels inevitable. That leads us to group number 7, where the ceiling is the play-in. And this is where I have the Miami Heat. I don't see any path to the Heat being a meaningfully different team at the end of this year, as they seem to always be these days, hovering around 7 to 10 seeds, capable of making a run, but I don't know if Jimmy Butler's cape still fits. This is also where I have the Atlanta Hawks. The Ice Tray Show is back in Atlanta, but we've seen that movie before. And I think this year is going to follow the same familiar script. And wrapping up Group 7 with the LA Clippers. I don't think this is going to be the opening year for the Intuit Dome that Steve Ballmer envisioned. By the end of the year, I think it's a very realistic possibility that we see them miss the play-in altogether. So now for Group 8. These are lottery teams, but mostly not trying to lose. And this group starts with the Utah Jazz. I think the past 2 years are very telling for what we can expect for the Jazz this season. They'll be competitive to start, and then probably start tanking in the second half of the year, landing themselves in the lottery, but not bad enough to out-lose the bottom feeders of the league. And in this group, I've got the San Antonio Spurs. I think the Spurs are going to see some improvement, especially with Chris Paul's leadership, and if Wemby has literally any improvement in his game at all, they're going to win more games than they did last year, but there's still just so much more growth needed across this entire roster before we can expect them to be legitimately competitive. And the final team in Group 8, the Toronto Raptors. There are a handful of guys on this roster that are solid, young NBA players, and Scotty Barnes has a chance to be really good. I think that's going to be enough to keep them out of the Tankathon, but I don't think it's going to be enough to stop them from trying. And now for Group 9, these teams are bad, but not bad enough to be happy about it. This is where I've got the Detroit Pistons. The Pistons are going to finish this year better than last year, and they won't set a new record for longest losing streak. And that is progress. This is also where I've got the Portland Trail Blazers. The Blazers being the bottom of the West says more about how good the conference is than it says about how bad the Blazers are. There are young guys to be excited about in Portland, but they're still playing for ping pong balls. Unfortunately, they're not going to be nearly as bad as some of the bad can be in the other conference. Rounding out this group, I've got the Chicago Bulls. The Bulls are finally leaning into a bit of a rebuild, and that means losing a lot of games. And unfortunately for them, there are teams with worse players on them already and probably still going to lose more games than them. And those teams fall in Group 10, the official Cooper Flag Sweepstakes. This is where the Charlotte Hornets reside, who are going to be pretty bad. But I think the difference here is that they're going to be not trying as hard to be bad. They just are bad. So they'll finish above a couple of teams, but that's about it. Like the Washington Wizards. It's going to be a 2-team race to the bottom throughout the year that I think the Wizards are going to lose because they get a particularly hot game or two from Kyle Kuzma when they probably rather that they didn't. And that leaves the Brooklyn Nets, who are actively trying to lose games. They're going to be successful in that endeavor, and they're likely going to offload a couple more players on this roster and make it really, really gross by the end of the year. Well, that's it. That's my prediction for how the league will look at the end of this year. So you can just skip ahead now that you know what happens. Now, something completely unexpected is going to throw a wrench in this and everyone's plans, and that's literally why we watch the games. But still, this was fun, and let me know in the comments how I did. Like, subscribe, and watch this next.